I saved the last signal box before they erased it forever. Between two market towns that have never been in a hurry to reach each other, on a single-track railway line that curves through water meadows and a wood full of rooks, there stands a small two-story building of timber and brick with more windows than wall. It is painted cream and maroon, colors chosen by a railway company that ceased to exist before most of the country was born, and faithfully renewed in those colors ever since, on the sound municipal principle that nobody can remember why and everybody would notice a change. A neat board on the front, white letters on black, gives its name, the name of the lane it guards, more or less, and its purpose is announced by the forest of slim rods and wires that emerge from its base and run away glinting beside the track in both directions. It is a signal box. It is, the signalman will tell you, one of the last of its kind on a working line in this part of the country, and he says this without drama, the way one might mention that the pear tree in the garden is older than the house. We shall keep him company through one turn of the year, because a signal box is a building that lives by repetition, and repetition, kindly observed, is the most restful subject there is. Begin on a morning in early spring, at 6. The signalman unlocks the door at the foot of the stairs. The box stands with its operating floor a full story up, so that its keeper can see over the road and along the line, and climbs into a room that is, by common agreement of everyone who has ever entered it, one of the pleasantest rooms in England. It is glazed on three sides, like a greenhouse that decided on a career. It smells of coal smoke, brasso, wax polish and strong tea, a blend matured here for 100 years and impossible to counterfeit. And along its spine, dominating everything, stands the lever frame, a rank of tall steel levers rising out of the floor, each as high as a man's chest, painted in code, red for stop signals, yellow for distance, black for the points, blue for the locks, their steel handles kept bare and gleaming. The floor in front of them is scrubbed boards, and there is a strip of coconut matting on which generations of signalmen have stood, and worn smooth grooves with their heels, hauling. His first duties are the duties of any small keeper of any small kingdom, the stove and the kettle. The stove is lit, the box is heated by coal, carried up in a scuttle, and the railway delivers a small mountain of it each autumn beside the steps, which is one of the quiet perks of the calling, and while it draws, he polishes. It must be understood that nothing in a signal box strictly requires daily polishing. It is done anyway, universally, immemorially. The lever handles are burnished with a cloth kept for the purpose. A signalman never grips bare steel with a bare hand if he is proud, for sweat rusts them, so the cloth lives over his shoulder like a waiter's napkin. The brass of the instruments is brought up to a soft shine. The windows, there are a great many windows, are chamoised. By the time the kettle boils, the sun is coming up over the wood, the rooks are conducting their parliament, and the room glows like the inside of a lantern, every surface answering the light. He drinks his tea standing, looking down the line. This is not idleness. Looking down the line is the job, everything else is bookkeeping. And then, at 6:20, the first bell. To explain the bell is to explain the whole beautiful, obstinate system, so let us take it slowly, as he would wish. His box does not work alone. It is one link in a chain of boxes strung along the railway, each a few miles from the next, and between each pair of boxes runs a telegraph circuit connected to a pair of bells, a bell in his box worked by a tapper in the next box, and the reverse. On these bells, the boxes speak in a code older than the telephone, rung not in letters but in meanings. One beat, pause, acknowledgement, call attention. 3 beats, 1, 1, is line clear for a stopping passenger train. 2 beats, train entering section. 2:1, train out of section. The signalman does not translate these in his head, any more than you translate your own name. After a decade or 4, the bell speaks straight to his hands. What the bells and the levers together enforce is one idea, and it is the great idea of railway signaling, arrived at in the middle of the 19th century and never improved upon, only automated, that the line is divided into sections, and that only one train may ever be inside a section at a time. Not usually. Not except when running late. One train, one section, always. The whole apparatus, the codes, the block instruments with their brass needles that stand at line clear or train on line, the polished levers, the locks between them, exists to make it mechanically difficult and procedurally unthinkable for two trains to occupy the same piece of England at the same moment. His grandfather's generation called the system absolute block, and the first word is the one they meant. There is something profoundly soothing, he finds, in operating a machine whose entire purpose is to make sure nothing interesting ever happens. So, 6:20. One beat on the bell, call attention. He answers with one. Then 3:1 from the box in the east, is line clear for the first stopping train of the day. His eyes go, by lifelong reflex, to the block instrument, to the state of his levers, to the line itself lying empty in the young light, and, all being as it should be, he answers the code back, turns the brass commutator on the instrument to line clear, and walks to the frame. Now the hauling. A signal lever does not flick, it is pulled, with the whole body, cloth on the handle, one foot braced on the frame plate, a long smooth heave that travels down through the floor, out along a mile of steel wire over cast iron pulleys, and ends, far up the line, with a semaphore arm swinging from horizontal to raised and a lamp changing its aspect from red to green. He pulls the distant signal last, yellow lever, the longest pull of all, a mile of wire, and its arm dips somewhere beyond the curve, telling the approaching driver the whole road is his. The levers stand reversed now in the frame, and the box settles to wait. 2 beats from the east, train entering section. He taps his acknowledgement. Somewhere beyond the wood, the train exists now on his instruments before it exists in his windows, which is the particular magic of the block system. The train arrives twice, once as information, once as iron. Then the sound of it, swelling, then the event itself. A 2-carriage diesel unit, 7 passengers and a bicycle, sways past below the box with a rush and a flare of green flanks, the driver lifting one hand from the power handle without looking up, the salute of one professional to another, exchanged some thousands of times, meaning everything and requiring nothing, and is gone round a curve towards the west, its sound folding back into the fields. He watches the tail lamp out of sight, which is not sentiment but regulation and older than regulation. A train must be seen complete, tail lamp and all, before the section behind it can be given up, because a train that has left a wagon behind in the section is the kind of surprise the whole system exists to forbid. Tail lamp seen. 2:1 on the bell to the east, train out of section. The needle swings back. The levers go back into the frame with a ringing clash of steel that is the box's most satisfying noise, and the line lies empty again, and the kettle, with its perfect sense of occasion, comes to the boil. There is one more instrument in the box that must be introduced, because it is the signalman's particular pride and the single-track line's particular genius, the token machine. On a double line, trains keep to their own rails like traffic on a road, but on a single line, one track serving both directions, the block system alone is not thought protection enough, and the railway long ago added a physical key to the procedural lock. The machine stands by the window, a tall cabinet of brass and mahogany with a dial like a moon-faced clock, and inside it a magazine of steel tokens, each engraved with the names of the section's two ends. The machines at either end of the section are wired together and interlocked so that only one token can be out of either of them at any moment, and no driver may enter the section without that token in his hand. It is the section made into an object. While the token for the Meadows section hangs in this box, no power on the railway can release another, and the line through the water meadows belongs, in brass and fact, to whoever holds it. The signalman wins the pointer, the bell speaks, the machine in the distant box surrenders its one token with a clunk of committed machinery, and the thing itself, heavy, cold, faintly oily, is slipped into a leather pouch on a great cane hoop, so that it can be handed up to the driver of a moving train. And the handing up is the nearest thing the box's day has to sport. The train comes on, slowing but by no means stopped. The signalman stands on the platform edge at the foot of the steps, hoop held high and steady. The driver leans from his cab window, arm out, and in one smooth passing exchange, practiced, both sides, over whole careers, the hoop is taken and, if a token is coming back the other way, its fellow received, all at 15 miles an hour in a wash of warm diesel air. Done well, it is invisible; done badly, the pouch goes bowling down the ballast and the train must stop and the driver walk back, to the accompaniment of remarks from the signalman that are also traditional, and also, in their way, part of the apparatus. It has been done well here, the log book suggests, for a very long time. 8 or 10 times a day, that liturgy. It has been, in the box's great days, 80 times a day. The ledger survives, and shows this modest lane crossing passing coal trains, milk trains, troop specials, the Saturday excursions to the sea, but the railway has grown quiet around the box, and the box has grown, if anything, more particular, the way a craftsman with fewer commissions finishes each one more finely. Between trains there is the crossing to work, the lane crosses the rails here, and the great white gates are his to close against the road, in the old way, wheeled round by hand, and there is the garden. Signal box gardens are a tradition the companies once encouraged with prizes, and his is the air of a century of them, dahlias staked along the fence in railway-approved rows, runner beans on a wigwam of old signal wire, and a rhubarb patch of terrifying vigor, manured, according to box legend, by the horse traffic of a departed age and never allowed to forget it. Passengers on the evening train look out for the garden. He knows this, and affects not to. Thursday, in this box, is Lamp Day, and Lamp Day is the week's excursion. The semaphore signals stand at distances from the box, the farthest, the distant signal, a good mile off along the curve, and each carries at its top an oil lamp that burns day and night, week in week out, asking only to be visited once a week, trimmed, filled and wiped. So on Thursday morning, between trains, the signalman takes the lamp bag, leather, older than he is, smelling gloriously of paraffin and metal polish, and sets off up the line on the walking route his predecessors wore into the grass alongside the ballast. It is the best walk in the parish and no rambler may take it. The river keeps him company half the way, the heron files its usual objection, in June the banks are all ox-eye daisies and the whole cutting hums. At each signal he climbs the ladder, hand over hand up the latticed post, into the wind, to the little platform behind the arm, and there performs the small weekly service, yesterday's lamp out of the lamp case, the fresh one in, the spectacle glasses, the red and green lenses the arm swings before the flame, wiped clean of a week of weather, the wick of the returning lamp to be trimmed at leisure on the bench at home. From the top of the distant signal, a mile from anywhere, he can see the whole of his world laid out, the silver curve of the line through the meadows, the wood, the church tower of one market town and the gas holder of the other, and the box itself, small and cream and maroon, sitting beside its crossing like a well-kept promise. He is not a man for poetry, but he has been known to remain up a signal post, on a fine Thursday, for longer than the wick strictly required. The lamps themselves are a lesson in sufficiency. A signal lamp burns about a week on a filling. It was designed to, the week being the railway's natural unit of devotion, and its flame is hardly bigger than a thumbnail, and yet, set behind the lens, it can be seen by a driver the better part of a mile away on a clear night. Nothing about it has needed improvement since before the Boer War. The department has, from time to time, proposed electrification of the lamps, and the proposal has, from time to time, been costed, and the costing has, so far, always come out, to the signalman's entirely disinterested satisfaction, in favor of paraffin. Summer in the box is all open windows, the smell of hay coming in over the instruments, swallows hawking under the eaves, the levers warm to the cloth, thunderlight over the wood and the bells sounding somehow rounder in the heavy air. Autumn is the leaf fall, when the rails grow greasy and the drivers break early, and the box's little stove resumes its reign, and the log book records mists that lie in the meadows so thick that the trains go through as sounds alone, whistling politely at the curve, present only on the instruments, arriving, so to speak, as information and departing the same way, their iron passage taken on trust. And winter is the box's finest season and its longest. The stove roars quietly. The kettle never quite goes off duty. Frost flowers the 9 dozen window panes, and the levers are cold enough to bite through the cloth first thing, and on the blackest mornings the semaphore's lamps, oil lamps still, on this stretch, trimmed and filled by his own hand once a week, hang their little constellations of green and amber out along the line, burning steadily in the dark over the empty meadows for the benefit, sometimes, of no train at all for an hour together, lit, like most faithful things, mainly on principle. The box has known other lives, and keeps their furniture. Upstairs, behind the door, hangs a bracket that once held the shunting horn, from the years when the yard beside the crossing, a field again now, its shape only visible in a dry summer, loaded milk and beet and the stationmaster's prize pigs. Under the frame there is still the long bench bed, board hard, on which the night men of the goods era snatched their lawful rest between trains, the box in those decades never closing at all, 2 men, 12-hour turns, the bells going all night, coal empties going down in the dark and the fish train coming up at 4, the whole nocturnal economy of the old railway passing this window while the parish slept. The log books of those years read like the pulse of a sleeping giant, trains every 20 minutes through the small hours, entered in copperplate by lamplight, punctuated by weather and by war. For the war reached even here, the box worked through the blackout with shades on its lamps and tape on its 96 window panes, and there is an entry, famous along the line, for a September night when the bells rang obliviously through a distant air raid, the ammunition trains, it notes with the box's characteristic sense of proportion, ran to time. A signalman does not decide what history passes his window. He offers it the road, and books it through, and keeps the flame trimmed. He is not lonely, whatever the delivery drivers think, calling up cheerfully to the man alone in his glass room. He has the bells, which are company of a kind, each neighboring signalman with his recognizable hand on the tapper, terse or courtly, and the telephone, and the driver's salutes, and the regulars, the postman, the farmer whose beasts cross twice daily and who has opinions about weather worth having, the retired signalman from the almshouses who walks up on Sundays to lean in the doorway and disapprove, contentedly, of nothing in particular. There is a robin who owns the steps, and a box cat. There has always been a box cat, the post passing like the signalman's own from incumbent to incumbent, who sleeps on the token machine for the warmth of its wiring and has never once been booked entering the section without authority. And between all the ceremonies lie the gates, which are the box's other conversation, the one it conducts with the road. The lane is not busy, that is the lane's chief characteristic and its finest quality. But it has its rhythms, which the signalman knows to the minute, the milk tanker at 7, patient as a liner, the school-run cars at 8:30, less so, the farmer's beasts at 10 and 4, filling the crossing wall to wall with steaming, unhurried traffic that regards the railway, correctly, as a latecomer to the landscape. The gates are the old kind, for great white timber leaves, wheeled round by hand at the end of a long iron arm, and closing them is a small public performance, the wheel unlatched, the walk, the smooth swing, the clang of the latch, the nod to the waiting driver, who nods back, the whole exchange a little slower than strictly necessary, because a level crossing worked by hand is one of the last places where the road can be reminded, gently and with a nod, that it is not the only way of getting about. In the box's early days, the gates stood normally closed against the railway, so rare were the trains, the ledgers record the change, some time before the First War, to standing closed against the road, a single line in an old book that is, if you think about it, a complete social history of the 20th century. The signalman has thought about it, at length, on wet afternoons, and is of the view that the gates will see the road out yet. Rain, since it has been mentioned, is the box's own music. 96 panes of glass and a timber roof make of every shower a performance, the first fat drops like knuckles on the panes, then the long grey roar on the roof with the stove ticking underneath it, the levers cold and bright in the dimmed light, the meadows dissolving into watercolor, and the bells, when they ring through it, sounding smaller and more precious, like a voice from a dry room far away. There is no better place in the parish to watch weather from, and only the heron would dispute it, and the heron, on the worst days, has been observed standing under the road bridge, conceding the point. The year has its ceremonies. In spring, the department's engineers come, the S&T, Signal and Telecommunications, successors of the wire-walking linemen of the old companies, and go over the whole apparatus joint by joint, the rodding to the points, the wire runs, the cranks and pulleys, the locking. The locking deserves its sentence, for it is the box's hidden conscience. Below the operating floor, in the locking room among the smell of oil and earth, lives a bed of interleaved steel bars connected to every lever, machine so that no lever can be moved unless every other lever agrees, so that the signalman cannot, even on his worst day, even half asleep, even meaning well in an emergency, pull a combination that would send one train into another. His grandfather's generation called it the mechanical interlocking, and had a plainer name for it too, the iron conscience. The engineers test it lever by lever, trying deliberately to make it fail, and it declines to fail, as it has declined for 100 and some years, and they sign the book and drink his tea and go, leaving the box certified sane for another season. And once a year, generally in the drowsy end of August, comes the inspector, by the afternoon train, in a collar and tie out of respect for the institution rather than the weather, to examine not the machine but the man. The log book is read. The lamp records are read. A question or two is asked about rules that have not changed since the reign of Edward VII, and are answered in the words of the rule book, which the signalman could recite in his sleep and, his wife reports, occasionally does. Then the two of them stand at the open window in the sun, professional matters concluded, and discuss dahlias until the up train takes the inspector away. The visit is entered in the book. All found in order. It always is. That, as the whole line knows, is rather the point of this box, and of the man in it. Who is he, this last signalman? He is a man who came to the box at 18 as a lad porter, learned the bells by lying awake repeating them, and has declined 2 promotions to larger places on the stated grounds that the larger places had no garden and the unstated grounds that they were not this box. He has spent, by his own arithmetic, done once on the back of a lamp record and never repeated, something over 60,000 hours in this room, more of his waking life than in any other building including his own house, and he regards those hours, pull by pull and bell by bell, as satisfactorily spent. He has seen the steam go, the wagons go, the milk and the mails go, the staff of 14 at the station up the line dwindle to a ticket machine under a canopy, and the box outlasts it all, cream and maroon, brass and coal smoke, because somewhere in the deep ledgers of the railway it has always been marginally cheaper, this year, to keep it than to replace it, a form of immortality the signalman finds entirely agreeable, resting as it does on nobody's sentiment and therefore on nothing that can wear out. And, then, where the day ends. The last train of the evening is offered from the east at 7 minutes past 10, call attention, 1 beat, is line clear, 311, line clear given, the long walk of the levers, the distant dipping its arm out in the dark. The train comes through lit like an aquarium, its handful of passengers reading or sleeping over the reflections of themselves, the driver's hand lifting in the glow of his desk lamp, and the tail lamp, watched out of sight around the curve, red and dutiful, carries the day away with it. Train out of section, 2-1. The needle falls to line clear for the last time. The levers clash home. He damps the stove, washes the mugs, hangs the lever cloth on its hook, and makes the final entry in a log book whose sentences have not needed to change in a century, last train 22.14. Lamps burning well. Box switched out, 22.30. All in order. On the landing he pauses, as he always pauses, and looks back into the moonlit room, the levers upright in their rank like a silver congregation, the brass asleep, the instruments holding their needles steady over the empty line, and then he turns the key in the door and goes down the steps into the smell of the meadows, leaving the box to keep its own company, which, after 100 years, it knows thoroughly how to do. And the oil lamps burn green along the line all night, over the rooks. And the river and the sleeping lane, for no train at all, on principle.